was going to have some theme music then to sort of welcome you on. It seems... No, it's okay, Alan, it's okay. Always start as you mean to go on, that's what I find. Are you all right? Yeah. Excellent. So, that was going to be the theme music. For those of you who are into obscure 80s one-hit wonders, I'm not going to sing it. The future's so bright, I've got to wear shades. And in the spirit of that song, this is only semi-ironically titled, this talk. You can take it whichever way you like. Now, last time I spoke here, it was just before 2012, December, you know, the whole 2012 thing. And I was sort of talking about the expectations built up around that and what might happen, what might not happen. This time, that's gone and passed, and yeah, well, it was, wasn't it? You know. So I've spent the last couple of years researching the whole expectation versus reality phenomenon around 2012. And I'm going to present to you now exclusive findings. This has never been seen before anywhere, so you are the first people to get this. And I warn you now, the first slide has got is quite graphic. Stay with me on this, it gets worse. So yeah, correlation of H and R plotted against T, I think you'll agree that's quite impressive. Yeah? Oh, sorry, the legend isn't up there properly. Yeah, there we go. For those of you that can read that. Now, okay, this is facetious. I haven't been researching this for 2 years. I made it up in 5 minutes. But it's kind of illustrating the point that, you know, where we were just before 2012 is the blue line. Where we hoped to be on December the 22nd, 2012, we're saved, or somewhere up that line. And unfortunately, where we actually are, the green line of reality, is somewhat different. I won't fill in the blanks for you, but you get the drift, okay? And I think it's really interesting. It kind of speaks to something in all of us, that we want some external force, some external event to sort of lift us out of our existence and to somehow make things all right, especially when we see the world seemingly on that downward trajectory, okay? But one of the many, many prophecies around the 21st of December 2012 that I really liked and resonated with me was, I think it was one of the Maori prophecies, that when it was translated at first, it said, the curtain will fall. And everybody thought, oh, that sounds a bit apocalyptic. It's the end of the world. And then somebody sort of revised that translation and said, no, it's not the curtain will fall, it's the veil will dissolve. So I'm paraphrasing that a little bit, but that's essentially what it is. And I think that's exactly the process we're in at the moment. So, without further ado, let's take a little jaunt through the ills of the world as we see it today. And you might also spot my obsession with obscure song lyrics from 1980s hits. Oh, dear. No. Shouldn't have done that. Do excuse me. Where are we going from here? Oh, this is not working properly. Okay. Little technical hiccup. So, it's quite obvious that the world is in a pretty strange place, and it seems to be coming to some kind of focus point at the moment, doesn't it? I think you'll agree, just watching the news and seeing everything that's going on. We've obviously, in the international arena, we've got, you know, the situation in Ukraine, the situation in Gaza, the sudden rise of ISIS. That's one nobody saw coming, was it? And just as a little aside thought, I think it's quite interesting how they're being called ISIS when they were originally called ISIL. But anyway, we won't go into that because that's a whole different set of ideas. And the war in Syria, obviously. It's kind of to do with the law of unintended consequences, isn't it? These sort of things, you know. ISIS has suddenly sprung into the news over the last, sort of 3 months maybe, you know. And I can't believe that those that were involved in the Iraq war and the war in Syria would not see that one coming. Likewise in the Ukraine, you know. There are a myriad conspiracy theories about the downing of the passenger flight. And again, I'm not going to go into those here. That's not the purpose of this talk. But law of unintended consequences comes into play there too. And I think that what these events are doing are presenting us with opportunities to question both our reality and what we are being told, because it's quite obvious that what we are being told is not the entire truth, but also our internal reactions to those as well. Let's hope that this next slide works okay. Come on, yes. And on the principle of the sort of microcosm and the macrocosm, bring it down a bit to sort of more localized thing. We see a rise in polarity of thought, in polarity of expression. You know, in England we've got the so-called Britain First Party that's sort of making all the headlines at the moment and starting to get a lot of press. We've got the sort of radical Islamists. Now, there are only a few hundred of these people. They're very, very thin on the ground. But they're getting a disproportionate amount of attention to them because it makes good headlines, let's face it. It's, you know, it's good copy. And that's happening right the way across Europe. And the interesting thing that I picked up on a little while ago was the stories that were breaking about English Muslims going to fight in the Syrian conflict. That last slide is one of their tweets that they've been putting out. Because what's interesting about these conflicts is that they're starting to become globally linked because they're using social media in a way that's never been used before. People actually in the conflict, people actually fighting, are able to put out these messages. That's never really happened before. I can't think of that ever happening in human history. Okay? And you'll see this one at the end. These are a couple of, obviously, anonymous British fighters out there. And for those of you that don't play video games, the Call of Duty is a sort of famous first-person shoot-'em-up. And the idea of respawning is what happens when you get killed in the video game. So in this slide, he's saying, we respawn in Jannah, and Jannah is the Muslim idea of paradise. So it's kind of, it's disturbing on quite a few levels in a way. But what for me is interesting is the reaction in Britain to this, because we've suddenly got the boogeyman of radicalization, and that's become the sort of byword. You hear it all the time, you know, radicalization in schools, radicalization in institutions. And I thought about this, and I thought, well, is radicalization an irrational response to what's going on in the world? Because when I was putting this talk together, I was looking for, obviously, photographs and trawling the web for it. And I'd forgotten that Safe Search was off on my browser. I normally keep it off because I don't like the Google or whoever it is filtering what I see. I want to choose what I can see. And I was looking for these things, so I called up Syria conflict. And to say that it's different from what we get presented in the mainstream media would not do it justice. You know, 3 clicks and you are seeing photographs that you really don't want to see, okay? And these guys that are becoming radicalized are actually fed this through their social media feeds, through their sort of fluency with the internet. And what they're seeing, compared to what we're seeing, is incredibly graphic content of people, innocent women, children, maybe their fellow fighters as they get it, being slaughtered. And we just don't get to see that in the mainstream media. And if you're a reasonably devout kid from a bit of a no-mark town somewhere or city somewhere in England and your prospects aren't that great, I can see the attraction of going to fight for a cause that I've been told to believe in. And I think that we miss a trick in this country by labelling them with this radicalisation tab, which effectively puts them outside of our society. What we're doing is we're saying, these people aren't like us, they're not conforming, and therefore we'll sort of shovel them over into this little corral. They're bad. And by doing that, we actually close down the roots of conversation about these things. So these kids are getting feeds from all of their friends, from different media formats. They're being tweeted by the guys that are out there on the front line, saying what a just and holy war this is and how they should come out there. And if you look at some of the feeds that are on there, it's quite amazing. It's like a holiday to them. You know, they're playing Call of Duty for real, with real guns. And when you're 20, that might be quite exciting. I'm not saying it's right, and I'm not saying it's justified, but I can understand the motivation behind it. And I think if we fail to do that as a society, we're unable to tackle it properly, because all they end up with is a bunch of sort of stuffy old men in suits saying, this is bad, you shouldn't do this. Or very sort of imams in their mosques saying the same thing. But when did we ever listen to our elders when you're that age and the blood is pumping? It doesn't happen. Come on. I have a slightly recalcitrant Mac. Yeah. It's grim. There's no other word for it. And it's probably the tip of the iceberg. And I take it everybody here understands what this story is about, yeah? Anyone not familiar with what's been happening here and the paedophile scandal? And this is a weird one for me as well, because being in the media world and being interested in media, all right, Cyril Smith wasn't sort of in the media world as such, although he was a politician, but putting aside the horror and the damage that's done to the victims of these people, there's an interesting thing going on in the psyche of the country as well at the moment, because they were quite big cultural parts. They played quite a big cultural role in certainly my teenage and young years. You know, everybody watched Jim Will Fix It on a Saturday night. Everybody had really fond memories of it as a program. Everyone has fond memories of Rolf Harris. He was this great cuddly figure that came up, and he was a national treasure. He played at bloody Glastonbury, for God's sakes. You know. And what happens when these people who, not necessarily heroes, but were important cultural sort of figures and cultural icons in the collective memory of a society, that's been wiped out now. You will not see, unless it's in relation to their paedophilia, you will not see anything on television or in any magazine to do with these people anymore. Okay? It's been excised from history. It's like year zero. They never existed. And again, I'm not entirely sure that that's a healthy response. It's an understandable response. because we tend to have a knee-jerk reaction. And when something horrifies us, when something scares us, when something frightens us, because of the darkness that's within it, we want to push it away. We want to deny it. We want to say, nothing to see here, move on. Okay? And I think that, again, shuts down opportunities for real growth because we don't actually get to fully talk about this. And the notion that there's going to be a deep public inquiry, a wide-ranging public inquiry, I hear that and I think, ooh, damage limitation. You know, it's going to be about what gets let out at the right time and, you know, who can we make a pariah of as a sort of sacrificial, because I'm sure as God made little apples, this goes far, far deeper than a couple of sort of TV celebs and the odd sort of publicist and things like that. We haven't seen the half of it yet. So, just to carry on with the litany of woe, are you cheery yet? It's kind of interesting being alive in a time when there are so many pressures bearing down on us in terms of all the things that seem to be wrong in the world. You know, the kind of destruction of the environment, whether that be through our sort of dodgy practices, whether it be through sort of the corporate rape of the rainforest, whatever it might be. The idea of the sort of robotization of the military and this ever-expanding sort of military state is, you know, that's ever-present in our lives. You know, who heard of drones 2 years ago? Very few people did. You know, they weren't like in the public consciousness. Now they're there all the time. And you've got people like Amazon saying, oh yeah, we can deliver your parcels in a drone. And you think, great, that would be fantastic. Until it sort of lands on my cat or something, you know. Some crap book that I didn't even want manages to kill my neighbour because it's sort of gone wrong. But it's this kind of gradual sort of seepage into the consciousness of these things. We've got the whole issues around water. That's starting to become big. It's bubbling up in the collective consciousness. I don't know whether you've ever seen that quote from the boss of Nestle. Who's seen that? Did anyone see that in his one of his speeches he gave, where he said that, I'm paraphrasing slightly here, but the idea of water as a human right is an extreme opinion. Now, he later clarified that and said, no, that's not what I mean at all. You know, but this gives you a little idea of where they're going. And in a funny kind of way, he's got a point. Bear with me on this one. Because profligate use of any resource which is limited without any thought of the consequences is dangerous. But that doesn't take away the right that it should be a fundamental human right. But that was a sort of corporate slip of the tongue. He misspoke, as so often they do, and I'm sure we're all fine about that now and quite happy that Nestle aren't trying to privatise the world's water supply, along with various other people like Monsanto, etc. And then, of course, we've got global surveillance. They're watching you. And it's true that you can't go anywhere in this country now, virtually, without either the official state mechanism watching you, or private individuals with CCTV watching you, or all of us watching each other on our mobile phones. It amazes me. You go to a gig or something like that, you know, and there's sort of people there who bought a ticket and they stand there like that going, oh, this is great, this is. It's like, save your money. Watch it on the bloody screen at home. It's going to be bigger. People like that, you know, the old thing at pop concerts, you'd hold up lighters. You know, now it's mobile phones with the lights on, isn't it? You know, it's ridiculous. Watching you, watching me. And, of course, big pharma, medicine, the whole kind of, you know, corporatization of health and all that entails. Markets, buoyant. Market's crashing. Again, you know, we're on this roller coaster ride of uncertainty to do with the whole financial system. And lastly, but not least, they are watching us. I think the revelations that have come out with the Snowden thing, and are increasingly coming out, are really interesting. And it kind of basically confirms what we thought all along. All us paranoid conspiracy theory nuts were going, oh, they're watching us, they're monitoring us, Project Echelon up in Yorkshire, you know, they're all our emails and everything. And everyone's like, oh, no, don't be stupid. And they are. I can't remember the figures now because they're mind-boggling, but it's exabytes of data. And if you know what an exabyte is, it's one with lots and lots of zeros on it. They're collecting this data all of the time. All of our shopping that we do at various places, all of that data, it's just there. It's just growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. And all of it is open to be monitored. None of it is secure, despite what they might assure you. And it's worth doing a bit of ferreting around on this if you're interested in this. If you're a bit of a geek like me, it's kind of quite interesting to see how they're doing all of the various things. And I think it's true that the CIA's new computer system that is being built by Amazon. Because apparently they have the best sort of, you know, with all their knowledge to do with orders and everything, they're the best people for the job. Which is great. I think it's really, you know, it's nice cooperation there. And of course, they won't be sharing any data. No. That's not going to happen. No. Oh, dear. Do you want to go to the pub? Is it open yet? Feels a bit like that, doesn't it? But again, this idea of the veil dissolving, this idea of revelation of things that have previously been hidden to us, I think all of these things have that quality to them. They all are showing us that which we just previously weren't aware of. And a lot of us in this community have been sort of bleating on about it for ages, but it's been becoming increasingly obvious to the everyday person in the street. And it's also obvious on an instinctive level as well. It's amazing the number of people you talk to about the situation in Gaza at the moment. And regardless of the political arguments, the basic idea that killing innocent women and children is wrong is very strong within people. Okay? And it's interesting seeing the sort of various posts on Facebook and the reaction to it. But we have a gut instinctive reaction about these things. And that's what I want to go on to talk about a little bit further on. But for me, this seemingly technological dystopia that we are entering into, I think there are two sides to it. And I think that if we reject technology and where it's going completely, and we deny that sort of side of things, we end up shortchanging ourselves and shortchanging what could be potentially interesting solutions to our problems. I had a funny experience a little while ago in that I bought a little piece of plastic for my camera. That's it. It's tiny, little thing. Very insignificant, inconsequential. But the interesting thing about it was that I didn't buy this bit of plastic from a shop, from a manufacturer that retailed it, because 2 days before I ordered it, it didn't exist. And when I say it didn't exist, I mean it wasn't even designed. Okay? We were having a discussion on a forum to do with that particular camera that I've got, and somebody said, oh, the focus ring's a bit small on it, and you know, a bit fiddly, blah, 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 blah. Somebody else said, oh, I think I might have a solution for that. About 4 hours later, he came back and said, yeah, have a look what I made. And there's a picture of a little ring like that, 3D printed. And everyone was like, wow, that's great, you know, fantastic stuff. So he said, yeah, I've put it up on the website. There's a website called Shapeways. And you can upload files for things that are 3D printed. And I come along and I say, oh, I'd like one of those. Click on the mouse. A week later, it comes into my postbox. And this got me thinking, because that's quite remarkable, I think, that something that didn't exist in the universe, wasn't even an idea in somebody's head, and then a week later I can buy one of them. Okay? And if I'd have got my own 3D printer, I could have made one myself, but hey-ho. But that got me thinking about technology and the role it plays in our lives, and the connection between technology and spiritual evolution, as well as, obviously, technological evolution. Because we all know that technology is Moore's law, it sort of quadruples every year, however many years, and the power of computing goes up and blah, 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 blah. But actually, it's where that interface happens with our own human evolution that is quite an interesting area to look at. It's just an idea of connectivity and the internet usage in Europe. And I think that technology often mirrors our own internal desires, okay? That the drive to create these things, whatever it might be, comes from a fairly deep place within us. A lot of that technology goes towards making weapons, which says a lot about our inner psyche. But one of the ideas, that people were sort of talking about post-2012 was, various ideas going around that we'd suddenly develop sort of spontaneous manifestation, and, that would sort of be a reality for us, and that telepathy and telepathic sort of connections between one another, that would be reality too. And it would suddenly occur. And I thought to myself, well, could you imagine what it would be like if you woke up on December the 22nd, 2012, and you could actually read everybody's thoughts, and they could read yours too? You'd be walking down the street, wouldn't you? And what do you look like? Kind of thing, You shouldn't be wearing those colours together, all that sort of... On a mundane level, the idea that we could cope with anything like that at this point in our evolution as a human race, I just think it wouldn't work. It would drive most people nuts. It's the same with the idea of manifestation. If you suddenly discovered you could instantly manifest, what would you instantly manifest? Loads more crap than the crap you've got already. We don't suddenly become enlightened in that way. But I think the drive and the innate sense within us for that kind of thing, because somewhere deep down inside we know that that's true, that that's how the universe works and that's how it should be, is starting to come out in technology. This is prototype instant manifestation. Now, admittedly, what we're making with it at the moment are sort of cheap, crappy baubles and interesting little trinkets and little sort of figurines of ourselves and things like that. But the potential for this sort of technology to really have an impact on both the economy of the world, because you imagine what happens when you don't need to actually have stock of things. You don't need to produce massive amounts of things. You can just produce things as you need them. It's big change, big sea change. But the drive to do this kind of thing, I think, comes from that same place, okay? And it's the same with the connectivity. The internet, we know the internet is a sea of good and bad things. You can find anything you like on there, any vice that you want to indulge in, but also you find incredibly good stuff. You find stuff that lifts the spirit. You find stuff that educates us truly. Radical and innovative ideas. Okay? And it's about discernment and knowing where to look and how to sift the wheat from the chaff. And if you look at social media nowadays, a lot of people criticize that and they say it's bad because, A, it's a sort of conduit for us being monitored. Yes, probably true. And that it wastes an awful lot of time. Yes, probably true. Guilty. But what it also does is it connects us in a way that we've never, ever been connected before. And the way that we can connect with one another across the planet, even though they might be digital connections, well, people say they're not real connections. Well, I would question that. If you're exchanging ideas with somebody, if you're exchanging information with somebody, if you're dialoguing with people, does it matter the medium? Don't know. But it is like a prototype collective consciousness. And we're feeling our way with these things. It's, the instant nature of it is kind of a little bit like telepathy with a safety valve. Okay? We can dialogue backwards and forwards incredibly quickly, and we're learning about the responsibility that comes with that. We're learning how to interact with one another in a way that we've never had to before. And I think those things are positive. I think that they are ways of actually trying out these ideas with the limited technology that we have in preparation for who knows what. I don't know. Maybe it will just be a linear progression. Maybe it won't. It's not a panacea for all the ills. I'm not saying that whatsoever. But I think it is it's first steps, if you like. First tentative steps into that kind of world. So, we can change a bit of tack now, because I did say in my little blurb for the talk, what's it got to do with hairy bikers? Not those hairy bikers. It has nothing to do with those hairy bikers. It's an in-joke for those of you that watch cookery programs. It's to do with that particular biker. Guy called Robert M. Pirsig, who some of you may have heard of. Does anybody know the book? Who's read it? Oh, quite a lot of you have read it. Okay. There is a conjoined thought here, so bear with me on this one. It might seem a bit of a left turn. It's the 40th anniversary of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which will really depress those of you who can remember buying it when it first came out. And you can see my edition is the 25th anniversary one, so that's pretty old. But I reread it, being a bit of a hairy biker myself, and it's kind of like a book that started me when I first got it. An old girlfriend of mine bought it for me when I first got a motorbike, and she said, "Read this, you'll love it." I read it and thought, no, can't cope with that. Got about halfway through. It was one of those books that I sort of progressively got further and further the way through. And then in my mid-20s, I kind of read it all through and thought, wow, that's fantastic. And it started me on a bit of a pathway. And I recommend you read it if you haven't read it. I think it's a great book. And it just tells the story of a road trip. We never know that it's the author, because he doesn't the person, the narrator of this book is the author, but it is. Okay, it's Robert Pirsig, and he goes on this road trip across America with his son to try and reconnect with his son for various reasons that I won't go into, and two friends of his, John and Sylvia, who are on another motorbike, and they travel from North Carolina across to, I think it's California somewhere, or Montana across to California. And one of the themes of the book, which I find really interesting, is that you quite early on get the idea that the narrator, Pirsig, and his friends John and Sylvia are very different characters. They represent two very different outlooks of the world, okay? Pirsig is a self-confessed classicist, as he puts it. And the classic mindset is to do with rational understanding. It's reason, it's science, it's technology. It's the nuts and bolts of everything. It's how it all works and puts together, okay? The world of the measurable. And Pirsig's very good at fixing bikes. He can take his bike apart on the road, he can tune it up, he can do all of these things. Whereas John and Sylvia are romantics. And the romantic mindset is far more about the open road, the experience, the vista, okay, the wind in the hair. they haven't got a clue. They can't even pump the tyres up. It's anathema to them. They just do not get the idea of what makes a motorcycle go along. They know if you put petrol in the tank and you twist the throttle, it goes, and that's about the sum total of it. And I think this is a really interesting sort of split, because I think that it's as relevant today as it was back then when he wrote it. I just want to read you a little section of it. What we have here is a conflict of visions of reality. The world as you see it right here, right now, is reality, regardless of what the scientists say it might be. That's the way John sees it. But the world as revealed by its scientific discoveries is also reality, regardless of how it may appear, and people in John's dimension are going to have to do more than just ignore it if they want to hang on to their vision of reality. What you've got here really are two realities, one of immediate artistic appearance and one of underlying scientific explanation. And they don't match and they don't fit, and they don't really have much of anything to do with one another. That's quite a situation. You might say there's a little problem here. Does that ring any bells? I think it does. I think, we've come on a long way since then, because the whole field of quantum science has started to sort of bring much more closure between those two worldviews. But I think the schism is still there. And cutting a very long book, very, very, very short, and leaving out much of the sort of beauty in the sort of detours that he takes, because it's peppered with philosophical discussions all the way through. He's looking for a uniting force, if you like, between these two different worldviews, something that will actually bridge the divide. And the thing that he comes up with is the notion of quality. Okay? Quality not as an attribute, but quality as an experiential thing. And in the book, it becomes quite clear that quality drives everything else forwards. If we say something's quality, we don't necessarily know why, but we know it innately. We know if we see an object, if we see a beautiful sunset, if we see a vista, if poetry, any of these things that are creations, we know innately whether they're quality or not, whether they speak to us. And his idea was that this notion of quality is the cutting edge of reality, and then everything else falls off from that. It's the driving force of the universe, if you like. It's what drives us to evolve. It's what drives everything. And only once we've had that experience do we then start to label it, and give it attributes and give it names. And this is quite obviously a parallel with the Tao of Eastern religion, this idea of the immediacy of that experience. I just want to read you one other thing. Quality, in terms of this analogy, was an attempt to find a point of common understanding between the classic and romantic worlds. Quality, the cleavage term between hip and square. Square being the classic, hip being the romantic. Seemed to be it. Both worlds used the term, both knew what it was. It's just that the romantic left it alone and appreciated it for what it was, and the classic tried to turn it into a set of intellectual building blocks for other purposes. Now, with the definition blocked, the classic mind was forced to view quality as the romantic did, undistorted by thought structures. And as I was reading this book, for the umpteenth time, because it is one of those sort of books you can go back to, I suddenly thought to myself, well, it's quite interesting. You could take the word quality and strike it out and replace it with the word love all the way through. And I'm not talking about romantic love or anything like that. I'm talking about the notion of that universal consciousness that permeates everything. And it would have the same meaning. It would have the same effect. The book would still make perfect sense. And I've since actually, whilst I've been sort of looking around and researching on it, there's a lot of people actually came to that same viewpoint, that his idea of quality in the book is the same thing. It's the one root of everything. What's this got to do with anything? Well, I think that we're in a situation now where it's quite obvious to me, certainly my feeling about the world as it is that we're not going to be saved by some external force. I don't believe that that's what's going to happen, and I could be wrong, and I'd be very happy to be proved wrong on that one, but I don't believe that that's what we are here to do. And so we end up in a situation where we seemingly have an awful lot of negativity and wrong in the world, but we need to somehow be able to filter that and actually cope with it on an individual level, and actually try and take steps to change the situation that we find ourselves in. And I had an interesting thing a couple of years ago, which led me to go down a path of particular sort of form of self-discovery and looking at various aspects of my life, because there were certain aspects of my life that weren't working very well for me. And I started doing work with a guy, lots of sort of talking, energy work, body work, that kind of thing. And one of the things that came up very, very strongly was the notion of presence. And for me, it was quite a shocking and sort of uncomfortable experience, realizing that whilst I thought I'd been pretty sorted for quite a long time, and, you know, I know my shit about things, and, you know, I've got a handle on what's going on in the world, my presence in the world was sorely lacking on occasions. And actually, it's kind of like, you know, one of those things where when you start to uncover these things within yourself, you start seeing it in other people as well. And I think that one of the diseases of the 21st century is a lack of presence. I think there's an awful lot of people on this planet that aren't really here. And they're not here for a variety of reasons. I think that probably some of us sort of like on the way down here, sort of as we were slipping out of the birth canal, thought, shit, I didn't sign up for this. I think on a deep soul level, some people are thinking, oh, no, this wasn't in the brochure. And I also think that there's a lot of people who cope with the seemingly overwhelming nature of the world and the influx of information and the flow of information, much of it seemingly very negative, by shutting off. Oh, look at that situation in Gaza, it's terrible, isn't it? What's on the other side? You know. And, or they'll post a picture of it. I had a great slide, actually. It's, I didn't put it in this talk, but I should have done it. It was this wonderful picture of a sort of Egyptian scene with, you know, hieroglyphics and, you know, and it said, the internet, a bit like ancient Egypt, they write on walls and worship cats. You know. It's this idea of stuff that just takes up our time and means that we never really connect in a meaningful way with the world. And I think that that is one of the prerequisites for this time that we find ourselves living in. Because whilst the shadow side of the world is presenting itself to us in glorious technicolor, And we're going through all of those processes. All the scandals that we talked about before, the paedophilia, the wars that are happening. And we seem powerless to do anything about it. Okay? The temptation just to go and exit, still be here physically, but not really be here, is great. And people say, oh, what can I do? What can I sort of, what can I achieve? What difference will my actions make? And so they take lessons, they adopt a particular philosophy, religion, whatever. They delve into the realms of knowledge in order to find answers. And all of that has value. All of that has deep intrinsic value. But I think that if we don't start from a foundation that's solid, then it's kind of like an energy that's all over the place. It's very difficult to focus it, it's very difficult to stay centered, and it's very difficult to cope with the vicissitudes of the world around us. And I think that what the world is calling us to do at the moment is to be here fully. It's one of my favourite expressions, and I've said it before, no harm in putting it up again. I love this expression because it's just, for me, so true. We spend fortunes in the Western world, particularly, trying to get enlightenment, and get out of ourselves and somehow reach somewhere else. And I think this has a real fundamental depth to it. If we get it wrong, if we put the cart before the horse, and we aren't really fully here, nothing else can follow from that. The world and the planet is calling us to be here fully and to embrace everything that's going on as best we can. To live lives of quality, to live lives of love. And if we can do that, and it's simple, but it's one of the most difficult things, but if we can do that, it gives us an inner strength to be able to cope with everything that's going on. Because it's a fundamental belief of mine that universal energy that we tap into when we do our meditations and that kind of thing, that connection that we have with the planet that we live on, we're the bridge between those two things. And it's our intent and our focused intent and our ability to take that energy and consciously use it for the good, to consciously strive for what Persig calls quality in his book. Okay? To make sure we live a life that's real. And when we do that, without having to do anything else, we give others permission to do that. It's that great cliche of the New Age movement, isn't it? Sort of, be the change you want to see in the world. But it's a cliche because it's kind of true, but I'd shorten it. In fact, I'd shorten it to one word. Just be. 10 minutes. Oh, bloody hell, I'm nearly finished. So, yeah. I'm going to wrap up and you can have a little bit of a longer break, actually. Things do look a bit bleak. But I think that we will get through it, okay? And I think that if we allow ourselves to experience everything that the world has to offer, and we allow ourselves not to be swayed by fear, because that's happening big time at the moment for a lot of people, hence the rise of the far right and the polarization of opinion and the fear of Muslims or immigrants or whatever. You know, if we're truly one world and one humanity, kind of doesn't ring true, does it? You can't sort of make those two worldviews mesh together. So in being present, in embracing who we truly are, and that involves our own shadow side as well, as we're seeing the shadow side of the collective, the wider society coming out. So we all have our own stuff to work on, and we all have our own stuff to accept, bring into the light, be compassionate towards. As we do that, we give others permission to do the same. And that transformation ripple effect comes out. Can you imagine what it would be like if the world just simply, and when I say the world, I mean for a lot of us in the West, were just simply present, truly present to what was going on? That would be transformational. So you're going to hear loads of stuff this weekend that will feed your mind with lots of ideas. But I would ask you at the root of it all to make sure that foundation's solid, and we're really going to get somewhere if that's the case. So, with that, I'll say thank you, and have a great symposium. Cool.
Thank you very much, Jason. Jason Porthouse.